My sister's boyfriend mocked my little coding project at her birthday dinner while my parents laughed. Dad told me to stop making a scene, so I let them talk. When he mentioned his firm's new project, I said something that made his smile fade. The clinking of silverware on porcelain was the only sound I wanted to hear. It was a polite, civilized sound, a rhythm of normalcy in a room that felt increasingly like a cage. Amelia's 30th birthday dinner. It was supposed to be a celebration, a milestone. For me, it was an endurance test. My parents sat opposite, beaming, not at their daughter whose birthday it was, but at the man beside her, Marcus. He was everything they'd ever wanted in a son-in-law. Sharp suit, sharper haircut, a job in finance that sounded important because it was incomprehensible, and a smile that could sell sand in the desert. My father, in particular, was captivated. He saw Marcus not as my sister's partner, but as a reflection of the success he'd always craved for his own children, a success he felt I had personally and pointedly denied him. Marcus had been holding court all evening, a glib monologue about market trends and quarterly earnings that left my mother nodding with a vacant, appreciative expression and my father leaning in as if receiving scripture. Amelia just squeezed his arm, her eyes shining. She was so proud. I tried to be happy for her. I truly did, but it was like trying to breathe water. Every smarmy, self-congratulatory word from Marcus felt like a stone pressing down on my chest. I had retreated into myself, pushing a piece of overcooked asparagus around my plate, focusing on the scrape of my fork against the ceramic. A small, controllable universe of one. "So, Alara," Marcus said, his voice slicing through my concentration. He had a way of saying my name that made it sound like an accusation. "Amelia tells me you're still tinkering with your, what is it, your little garden app?" The table fell silent. My mother's smile tightened. My father shifted in his seat, a preemptive sigh already forming in his lungs. This was the moment the spotlight swung to me, the family's resident disappointment. I had a degree in computer science, a good one, but I hadn't climbed the corporate ladder. I worked for a nonprofit, maintaining their systems, and in my spare time, I built small, open-source projects. My latest was an application to help community gardens manage their planting schedules and surplus sharing. It was small, it was niche, it made no money, and to my family, that meant it was worthless, a child's hobby. "It's a resource management tool for urban agriculture collectives," I said, keeping my voice level. "It helps reduce food waste," Marcus chuckled. It was a practice sound, perfectly pitched to be condescending without being overtly cruel. "Right, so you're helping old ladies trade zucchinis. That's quaint." He took a sip of his wine, a Merlot that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. "I just landed the Aethel Corp account. We're structuring the financing for their new global platform, Project Chimera. We're talking a 9-figure deal." "But hey, zucchinis are important too," my sister giggled, a high, nervous sound. "Oh, Marcus, be nice." It was her standard defense of him, a gentle chiding that carried no weight and was meant only to absolve her of complicity. "I am being nice," he said, spreading his hands in a gesture of mock innocence. "I think it's great that Alara has a little hobby, keeps her busy." My face was hot. I could feel the blood rushing to my cheeks. It wasn't just the words, it was the audience. It was my mother's pained, pitying look. It was my father's undisguised embarrassment. He cleared his throat, a rumble of impending paternal disappointment. "Alara, don't be so sensitive. Marcus is just teasing." "I'm not being sensitive," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted. "I'm just tired of my work being treated like a joke." "Oh, here we go," my father muttered, pushing his chair back an inch. "The universal sign for I am disengaging from this tedious emotional display. For goodness sake, can we not have a scene? It's your sister's birthday." A scene. That was their word for it. Any expression of my own feelings, any defense of my own life was a scene. It was a disruption to the carefully curated illusion of their perfect family, an illusion in which Marcus was the crown prince and I was the court jester. Fine, I could play the part. I picked up my wine glass, took a slow, deliberate sip, and let the silence hang in the air for a beat too long. I let them think I was backing down, retreating into my shell as I always did. I let them all relax. Then I turned to Marcus, forcing a placid smile onto my face. "Aethel Corp," I said, my tone light, inquisitive. "That's a huge deal. Congratulations. Project Chimera, you said?" "I've been hearing some buzz about that in the dev community. They're aiming for a pretty aggressive launch schedule, aren't they? Especially for a platform of that scale." Marcus preened. He was back on comfortable ground, the expert in the room. "Aggressive is an understatement. They're revolutionizing the logistics industry. The architecture is groundbreaking, completely scalable, cloud-native, built on a microservices framework that's absolutely state-of-the-art." He was just reciting buzzwords now, the kind you put in a press release. I nodded, taking the bait. "Fascinating. Amelia mentioned you were involved on the technical due diligence side as well, not just the finance." "I lead the team," he said, puffing out his chest. "My job is to make sure the tech is as solid as the business plan before we sink $100 million into it." "Of course," I said. "That makes sense. So you must be intimately familiar with their whole tech stack. I'm guessing they're using Helios Core for the back-end orchestration, right? It's really the only open-source framework that could handle that kind of load and rapid deployment." His smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of surprise. He hadn't expected me to know the name of a niche, high-performance framework. To him, I was the zucchini app girl. "Yes, that's right," he said, recovering quickly. "Helios is the backbone. Impressive, you've heard of it." "I do more than trade vegetables," I said, my smile never wavering. I let him absorb that small jab. I saw my father's eyes narrow, a silent warning. I ignored it. I had the floor now. "Helios is brilliant, powerful, elegant, but it has its quirks. I'm sure your team did a deep dive on the whole codebase, especially the more obscure libraries." And then I delivered the line, the sentence I had been constructing in my head for the last 30 seconds, a sentence that was meaningless to anyone else at the table but would be a tiny, perfectly aimed dart for Marcus. Marcus. So, I said, leaning forward slightly, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. What was your team's mitigation strategy for the serialization vulnerability in the temporal state function? The one that can lead to remote code execution on any node that processes a malformed timestamp object? Silence. Not the awkward silence from before, but a thick, heavy, dead silence. My parents and Amelia were looking back and forth between us, completely lost. But Marcus's smile was gone. It didn't just fade, it collapsed. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, pale sheen under the restaurant's dim lighting. His eyes, which had been sparkling with arrogant mirth all night, were now wide and fixed on me. He looked like a magician whose trick had just spectacularly, horribly backfired. He knew. In that single, breathtaking moment, I knew that he knew. He knew about the vulnerability, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he had ignored it. He licked his lips, his throat working. That's a highly specific technical query, he stammered, trying to regain his composure. It's a minor, known issue. We have a patch in place. He was lying. I could see it in the frantic darting of his eyes. There was no patch, because I was the one who had discovered the vulnerability. I had found it 2 weeks ago during a code audit for a completely different project. It was a ghost in the machine, a deeply buried flaw in an obscure corner of the Helios framework that no one had ever noticed. I had confidentially reported it to the Helios core security team just 3 days prior. There was no public knowledge of it. There was no patch. The only way he could possibly know about it was if Aethel Corp's own internal developers had found it, and the only reason he would be so terrified was if they had decided to hide it, to push forward to meet their insane launch deadline and pray no one else ever found it. I held his gaze, my placid smile turning into something colder, sharper. A patch? That's fantastic news, because a vulnerability that allows for arbitrary code execution isn't a minor issue, Marcus. It's a company killer. It's the kind of thing that would make a $100 million investment evaporate overnight. You'd have to be criminally negligent to launch a global platform with a flaw like that still in the code. My father finally found his voice. Alara, that's enough. What in God's name are you talking about? You're embarrassing yourself. But I wasn't looking at my father. I was looking at Marcus, whose entire glib persona had shattered, leaving only raw, naked panic. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Amelia was looking at him, her brow furrowed with concern. Marcus, honey, are you okay? What is she talking about? He couldn't answer. He just kept staring at me, his mind clearly racing, trying to calculate how I could possibly know his project's single greatest secret. The secret that could not only scuttle his precious deal, but could end his career and expose Aethel Corp to catastrophic legal and financial ruin. The power dynamic at the table had not just shifted, it had been inverted with the force of a tectonic event. I was no longer the quaint little hobbyist. I was the person who held a pin over his grotesquely inflated balloon, and we both knew it. The zucchini girl was about to get her revenge. The rest of the dinner was a blur of excruciating tension. Marcus mumbled something about a headache and spent the next 20 minutes staring into his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen. My father tried to restart the conversation, asking about the weather, about a sports game, about anything at all, but his attempts were met with monosyllabic answers. The celebratory atmosphere had curdled into a thick soup of resentment and confusion. Amelia kept shooting me wounded, angry glances, as if I had deliberately ruined her special night, which, in a way, I suppose I had. My mother just looked exhausted, her face etched with the familiar disappointment of a woman whose evening had failed to meet her expectations of effortless harmony. I paid for my meal in cash, laid the bills on the table, and left before the sad, deflated birthday cake could even be brought out. I didn't say goodbye. Walking out of that restaurant and into the cool night air felt like surfacing after being held underwater for years. I could breathe again. The rage and humiliation that had been simmering in my gut had been replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. This was bigger than a family dinner. It was bigger than Marcus's smugness or my father's disapproval. A multi-billion-dollar corporation was about to launch a product with a flaw so profound it was like building a skyscraper with a crack in the foundation. And Marcus knew. He was willing to risk the data and privacy of millions of potential users, all for his deal, for his bonus, for his ego. When I got home, I didn't sleep. I went straight to my computer, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed and precision born of pure adrenaline. I pulled up my correspondence with the Helios security team. My initial report was there, time-stamped. It was detailed, professional, with a proof-of-concept exploit that demonstrated unequivocally how the vulnerability worked. Their reply was there too, acknowledging the severity and thanking me for the responsible disclosure. They were working on a patch, they'd said, and would issue a security advisory in 2 weeks, following standard procedure to give developers time to prepare. 2 weeks. Aethel Corp's launch was scheduled for 10 days from now. I started documenting everything. I wrote down the entire conversation from dinner, word for word, as best I could remember it. I noted the time, the place, who was present. I wrote down Marcus's exact phrasing, a minor, known issue, and we have a patch in place. Lies. Demonstrable, provable lies. I was building a case, though I wasn't yet sure who I would be presenting it to. The next morning, the first call came. It was my mother. I have never been so ashamed in my entire life, she began, without even a hello. To ruin your sister's birthday like that, to attack her partner, a man who has been nothing but good to her? What is wrong with you, Alara? He was mocking my career, Mom, I said, my voice weary. I had expected this. He was joking. And you had to turn it into some bizarre technical interrogation. You made him so uncomfortable he could barely speak. Amelia was in tears after you left. Do you know that? In tears. On her 30th birthday. Did she ask you to call me? A brief pause. She is too upset to speak to you. Your father and I, we are just appalled. Whatever jealousy you feel towards your sister's success. You need to find a way to deal with it that doesn't involve sabotaging her happiness. Jealousy. That was the narrative they had settled on. It was simple, easy to understand. It painted me as the bitter, unsuccessful spinster, and them as the concerned, long-suffering parents. It required no understanding of the actual issue, no acknowledgement that I might have had a valid point. It was perfect for them. This isn't about jealousy, I said, but my words were a whisper against the hurricane of her judgment. This is about him being reckless and dishonest. Oh, stop it. You don't know what you're talking about. You make your little apps in your spare room and you think you know more than the head of a major financial team? It's delusional, Alara. Truly. She hung up. The second call came an hour later. It was Amelia. Her voice was thick with tears, just as my mother had promised. How could you? She sobbed. You always have to be the center of attention. You always have to tear everything down. I was happy, Alara. For the first time in a long time, I was really happy, and you couldn't stand it. Amelia, listen to me. Marcus is lying. He's putting his company and its future customers at enormous risk. The thing I mentioned, it's real. It's serious. Oh, I'm sure it is, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Marcus explained it all to me. He said it's a tiny bug, something his engineers have already fixed, and you're just a bitter amateur who got one little technical term right and is trying to blow it up to make yourself feel important. He said you're probably trying to blackmail him. The word hit me like a physical blow. Blackmail. The narrative was escalating. That's not true. I would never. Save it, she snapped. He's a good man, Alara. He's successful and he loves me. And you are trying to destroy that because you can't stand to see me have something you don't. Don't call me again. Don't talk to me. Just stay away from us. The line went dead. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, the phone still pressed to my ear. I had been disowned in the space of 2 hours. My family had closed ranks, and I was on the outside. All because I had dared to challenge the golden boy. The despair was a physical weight, a crushing pressure in my chest. For a moment, a dark, insidious thought slithered into my mind. Just let it go. Let Aethel Corp launch. Let Marcus have his victory. What did it matter to me? I could retreat, lick my wounds, and maybe, in a year or two, my family would forgive me for my mysterious, unforgivable crime. But then I thought about the vulnerability. I pictured the data of millions of people, their names, their addresses, their financial information, all sitting behind a door with a broken lock. A lock that I knew was broken. A lock that Marcus knew was broken. And I thought about his smug, condescending face as he talked about his 9-figure deal. No, I couldn't let it go. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about me. It was about the fact that I was right. I needed help. Not just emotional support, but professional, strategic help. My family was never going to be my ally in this. So I called the one person in my family who had always lived outside their carefully constructed world of appearances. My Uncle Ben, my mother's younger brother, a grizzled, cynical, brilliant contract lawyer who had been semi-estranged from the family for years after a bitter fight with my father over an inheritance. He'd always had a soft spot for me, the other family weirdo. I laid out the whole story for him, from the dinner to the phone calls. I explained the technical details of the vulnerability in the simplest terms I could. He listened patiently, without interruption, a series of thoughtful grunts his only response. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. Well, kid, he finally said, his voice a gravelly rumble. You've really stepped in it this time. I know, I whispered. What do I do, Uncle Ben? First thing, he said, his voice shifting, becoming sharper, more focused. The lawyer was taking over. You don't speak to your sister, your mother, your father, or that slick-suited boyfriend of hers again. Not a word. No texts, no emails, no calls. If they contact you, you do not respond. Understood? Yes. Second, you are going to forward me every piece of documentation you have. Your report to the Helios team, their response, the timeline of events you wrote last night, everything. We need a bulletproof paper trail that establishes you as a responsible white hat security researcher, not a blackmailer. Okay. Third, he continued, we are not going to Aethel Corp. Not yet. Going to them directly is what a blackmailer would do. It's also what a fool would do. Their lawyers would bury you in litigation until you glow in the dark. No, we're going to be smarter. We're going to create a situation where they have no choice but to listen. How? Let me make a few calls, he said. I know a guy who knows a guy at the Securities and Exchange Commission, a publicly traded company preparing to launch a flagship product while knowingly concealing a catastrophic security flaw that smells an awful lot like securities fraud. It's amazing how quickly a letter from the SEC can get a corporation's attention. Now, send me those files. And Alara? Yes? Hang in there, kid. You did the right thing. It's the world that's wrong. Hanging up the phone, I felt a sliver of hope. I wasn't alone anymore. I had an ally, a powerful one. The next few days were a masterclass in legal and strategic maneuvering, orchestrated by Uncle Ben. I became a data-gathering machine. I compiled every piece of evidence, organized it, annotated it. Ben, meanwhile, was working his contacts. He didn't go straight to the SEC, which he called the nuclear option. Instead, he found a more subtle point of leverage. He discovered the name of the insurance underwriter for Aethel Corp's new platform. Every major product launch has a massive insurance policy attached to it, covering everything from data breaches to service outages. These policies are contingent on the company performing due diligence and accurately representing the risks involved. Ben drafted a carefully worded letter. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of legal ambiguity and veiled threat. It was addressed to the chief risk officer of the insurance company. It didn't accuse Aethel Corp of anything directly. It simply stated that he represented an independent cybersecurity researcher who had discovered a critical, unpatched vulnerability in the Helios core framework, a key component of Project Chimera. It went on to say that his client had reason to believe that Aethel Corp's senior management, including the due diligence team lead, Marcus Thorne, was aware of this vulnerability and had chosen not to disclose it to their underwriters. letters. The letter concluded by politely suggesting that the underwriter might want to seek assurances from Aethel Corp that their risk assessment was complete and accurate before the policy went into effect on the launch date. He sent it via courier, marked urgent and confidential. The fuse was lit. The explosion came 24 hours later. I was at work, trying to focus on debugging a donor database, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize, a sleek, corporate-sounding law firm in the city. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, Uncle Ben called. "Did you get a call from a Mr. Cromwell at Sterling Cromwell and Price?" he asked, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "I just did." I didn't answer. "Good. They're Aethel Corp's outside counsel. The insurance company must have called them, screaming. They're panicking." Cromwell left me a voicemail that was equal parts threatening and desperate. "He wants an immediate meeting. He wants to know our demands." Demands? I don't have any demands. I just want them to fix the problem. I know that, kid, but they don't. They think this is a shakedown, which is perfect. It means they're scared. Now, here's what's going to happen. We are going to agree to a meeting, you and me, them and their client, and you are going to let me do all the talking. You are there to be the quiet, unimpeachable expert. You will only answer direct technical questions. No emotion, no family drama, just the facts. Got it? Got it. My heart was pounding. This was real. This was happening. The meeting was set for the following afternoon in a sterile, glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The air was thin up there. I felt like I couldn't get enough oxygen. On one side of the massive mahogany table sat me and Uncle Ben. On the other side sat 3 lawyers in identical navy suits, their faces impassive masks. And next to them, looking small and rumpled and utterly terrified, was Marcus. When he saw me walk in, his face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, fury, and then a deep, profound dread. He didn't look at me again. He stared at the polished surface of the table as if it held the secrets to the universe. The lead lawyer, Cromwell, started things off. His voice was smooth as silk, but with an undercurrent of steel. "Let's be clear about why we're here," he began. "My client, Aethel Corp, takes security very seriously. They have a robust team of engineers who are constantly monitoring their systems. The issue your client has raised is a known, low-priority item that was already scheduled to be patched in a post-launch update. This entire situation is a profound misunderstanding, blown out of proportion." Uncle Ben leaned back in his chair, a small, unimpressed smile on his face. "A low-priority item? That's interesting, because my client's proof-of-concept exploit, which we have right here, demonstrates how one could gain root access to any server running the platform in under 60 seconds. That doesn't sound very low priority to me. In fact, it sounds like the kind of thing the FBI's cybercrime division gets very excited about, the kind of thing that reporters for the Wall Street Journal write front-page stories about." Cromwell's eye twitched. "There is no need for inflammatory language. We are prepared to offer your client a generous bug bounty for her diligence, a sign of our goodwill. Let's say $20,000. In exchange, of course, for her signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and a sworn affidavit that this issue has been resolved to her satisfaction." It was a test, a lowball offer to see if we were in it for the money. "My client isn't interested in a bug bounty," Ben said calmly. "My client is interested in ethical corporate behavior. She is a great admirer of Aethel Corp's innovative work and would hate to see its reputation and its stock price damaged by a premature and reckless product launch." He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "These are our terms. They are not negotiable." I glanced at the paper. Ben had shown it to me that morning. It listed 3 points. 1. Project Chimera's launch will be postponed indefinitely until the Helios core vulnerability is patched, and the patch has been verified by an independent third-party security auditor, chosen by my client. 2. Aethel Corp will issue a public statement acknowledging a critical security flaw was discovered by an independent researcher and thanking them for their responsible disclosure, thereby protecting my client's professional reputation. 3. The due diligence team lead, Marcus Thorne, whose professional negligence and subsequent misrepresentations put the company at risk, will be terminated immediately. Cromwell read the list, his face hardening. He slid the paper over to Marcus. Marcus read it, and all the color that had returned to his face drained away again. He looked up, his eyes wide with panic, and for the first time, he looked directly at me. It was a look of pure, pleading desperation. He was begging me. The great Marcus Thorne was begging me to save his career. I felt nothing. I just stared back, my face a blank slate. "This is outrageous," Cromwell sputtered. "This is extortion. We will not be dictated to, and we certainly will not be told how to manage our personnel." "Fine," Uncle Ben said, and he began to gather his papers. "Then this meeting is over. Our next communication will be with the SEC and the lead technology reporter at the New York Times. I believe we have his direct number. Have a nice day, gentlemen." He stood up. I stood up with him. We were almost at the door when Cromwell's voice rang out. "Wait!" We turned. Cromwell was looking at his fellow lawyers, who gave him subtle, almost imperceptible nods. He looked at Marcus, whose face was now buried in his hands. "Give us the room," Cromwell said to Marcus and the other 2 lawyers. They scurried out, leaving the 3 of us alone. Cromwell sighed, the polished corporate mask falling away to reveal a tired, pragmatic man who just wanted to make a problem disappear. "Okay," he said, "let's talk." The negotiation took 2 hours. We gave on the public statement. They insisted it would cause a panic and hurt their stock. Ben countered that they would instead fund a $50,000 grant in my name to a nonprofit of my choice that promotes women in technology. A quiet, reputation-building victory for me, instead of a loud, reputation-destroying defeat for them. They agreed. We gave on the immediate termination. Instead, Marcus would be allowed to resign, effective immediately, for personal reasons. A face-saving gesture, they agreed. But on the first point, the postponement and the third-party audit, Ben was immovable. It was the heart of the matter. It was the reason we were there. After After a dozen frantic calls to Ethel Corp's CEO, they finally, grudgingly, capitulated. We signed a preliminary agreement right there in the conference room. It was over. I had won. Walking out of that building, I felt strangely empty. There was no elation, no triumphant surge of adrenaline, just a profound and deep exhaustion. Justice, it turned out, was just a series of tedious meetings and carefully worded documents. The fallout was swift and brutal. The next day, Ethel Corp announced a delay in the launch of Project Chimera, citing the need for further performance and security enhancements. The market barely blinked. Marcus Thorne's resignation was announced in a brief internal memo. He simply vanished from the corporate world. And then my world exploded. Amelia called me, screaming, hysterical. He's gone! They forced him out. He told me everything. You went to his company with some lawyer and you threatened them. You got him fired. You ruined his life. Are you happy now? Are you satisfied? Amelia! He was lying. He was going to let the company. I hate you, she shrieked, the sound so full of venom it made me flinch. You are a toxic, jealous monster. You destroyed my life. My life! I hope I never see you again. She hung up. Then came the email from my father. It was short and cold. It informed me that until I apologized to Marcus and to Amelia for the unconscionable damage I had caused, he no longer considered me his daughter. He had chosen his side. He had chosen the illusion of success and normalcy over his own child. That was my rock bottom. I was sitting in my apartment holding a legal document that proved I was right, that I had acted ethically and honorably. And in my other hand, I was holding the shattered pieces of my family. I had won the battle, but in the process, I had lost the war I never even knew I was fighting. The victory was hollow. It tasted like ash. The weeks that followed were a blur of grief. I went to work, I came home, I ate, I slept, but it was all automatic, a ghost going through the motions. The grant was paid to the nonprofit, and they sent me a lovely thank you letter. The independent auditors confirmed my findings and oversaw the implementation of the patch. Project Chimera eventually launched, 6 months late but secure. I had done the right thing. The world was a slightly safer place because of me, but my world had shrunk to the 4 walls of my apartment. Uncle Ben was my lifeline. He called every day. He'd show up at my door with takeout and bad movies. He never said, I told you so. He never said they'll come around. He just sat with me in the wreckage, a quiet, steadfast presence. They made their choice, kid, he said one night as we were watching some old black and white film noir. They chose the story they wanted to believe over the truth. That's not on you, that's on them. Slowly, very slowly, I began to heal. The pain didn't go away, but it changed. It became less of a gaping wound and more of a scar, a permanent part of my landscape. I started to focus on the life I had, not the one I had lost. I poured myself into my work. I took the reputation I had quietly built from the Ethel Corp incident and started doing some freelance security consulting. My little Zucchini app got some unexpected attention, and I started building it out, adding new features. I was good at what I did. I was valuable. I had spent so many years craving validation from people who were incapable of giving it. I had never learned to validate myself. About a year later, I got a tentative email from Amelia. Marcus was long gone, she said. She'd eventually learned the full truth about what he'd done, not from me, but from another engineer at Ethel Corp who had quit in disgust. She was sorry, she said. She was in therapy. She wanted to know if we could talk. My first instinct was a rush of relief. My sister. She was coming back, but then I paused. I thought about the screaming, the accusations. I thought about the word hate. A scar is a healed wound, but if you press on it, you can still feel the memory of the pain. I wrote back to her. I told her I was glad she was getting help. I told her that I loved her, but that I wasn't ready to talk yet. I told her that trust, once shattered, had to be rebuilt brick by brick, and that required more than an email. It required time and consistent, demonstrated change. I was setting a boundary. For the first time in my life with my family, I was building a wall not to hide behind, but to protect the small, fragile new life I had built for myself. My relationship with my parents remains frozen in an icy silence. Maybe one day that will thaw, maybe it won't. I've come to accept that some things, once broken, can't be perfectly repaired, but my life is my own now. I am defined not by their disappointment, but by my own integrity. I have my work, which I love. I have my friends and my Uncle Ben. I have my quiet, peaceful apartment. And I have my little garden app, which is now used by community gardens in over a dozen cities, helping people share food, build community, and grow things. It's small. It's niche. It doesn't make much money, but it's good, and it's mine. And that, I've finally learned, is more than enough. The victory I achieved wasn't in that conference room. It was in the quiet moments afterwards, in learning to survive the consequences of telling the truth, and in discovering that my own validation was the only one that ever really mattered. The process of setting that boundary with Amelia was harder than any legal battle. It felt unnatural, like telling a part of my own body that it was no longer welcome. For weeks after sending that email, I was plagued with guilt. I reread her message 100 times, searching for clues, for the right tone. Was she truly repentant, or was she just lonely now that Marcus was gone? Was her apology a genuine recognition of the pain she had caused, or was it just a step in her own therapeutic process, a box she needed to check on the road to her own healing? I didn't know, and the uncertainty was agonizing. Uncle Ben, in his infinite gruff wisdom, gave me a piece of advice that stuck. Don't listen to her words, he'd said over the phone. Watch her actions. Words are cheap. People say, I'm sorry all the time. It doesn't mean they've changed. It just means they're sorry they got caught, or sorry they're facing consequences. Real change is a pattern of behavior over time. Give it time. So, I did. I didn't block her number, but I didn't reach out. A month later, a small bouquet of flowers arrived at my apartment. No card, just a simple arrangement of daisies and sunflowers. I knew they were from her. It was a gesture, a quiet acknowledgement. A week after that, she sent an article about a new open open source initiative with a short note. Thought you might find this interesting. She wasn't pushing. She wasn't demanding forgiveness. She was just there, a tentative presence at the edge of my life. It was a start. My professional life, meanwhile, was flourishing in ways I never could have anticipated. The story of the anonymous researcher who had forced Aethel Corp to delay their launch had become something of a legend in certain cybersecurity circles. No one knew my name, but the details, the niche framework, the underwriter leverage were specific enough that a few key people in the industry figured it out. I started getting quiet inquiries. A venture capital firm wanted me to consult on their tech investments. A major software company wanted me to do a security audit of their flagship product before it went to market. The grant money from Aethel Corp had also had an effect. The nonprofit, Code Girls, which taught coding to young girls in underserved communities, had used the funds to expand their program. They invited me to be a mentor. The first time I walked into one of their workshops and saw a room full of teenage girls, their faces illuminated by the glow of their laptops as they learned to write their first lines of Python, I felt a sense of purpose that dwarfed any corporate victory. This was real. This was building something that mattered. I was helping these girls find their voices in a language that the world, whether it liked it or not, had to listen to. I was giving them the tools that had allowed me to save myself. It was during one of these workshops that I had an epiphany. Marcus and my family had mocked my little hobby app because it didn't generate profit. Their entire worldview was filtered through a lens of financial success. They saw value only in things that could be quantified on a balance sheet. But the Zucchini app wasn't about money. It was about connection. It was about using technology not to disrupt or to scale or to monetize, but to facilitate a simple human act of sharing. The Code Girls program wasn't about creating the next generation of tech billionaires. It was about empowerment, about giving young women the confidence to build their own solutions to their own problems. I had been fighting a battle on my family's terms, trying to prove my worth in a system I didn't even believe in. The real victory wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about realizing I didn't need their approval in the first place. My definition of success was simply different from theirs, and that was okay. It wasn't a failing on my part. It was a choice. This realization was liberating. It felt like a heavy coat I had been wearing my whole life had finally been taken off. I stopped thinking about my parents. I stopped dwelling on the angry words and the cold silence. Their absence in my life was a void, yes, but it was a void I could now fill with other things. With my work, my mentoring, my friendships, the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved, of a line of code elegantly written. The legal agreement with Aethel Corp had included a strict non-disclosure clause, but it was a two-way street. They couldn't talk about it any more than I could. This created a strange kind of peace. Marcus Thorne had simply disappeared. I googled him once, months later, out of a morbid curiosity. His LinkedIn profile was gone. His name had been scrubbed from old press releases. It was as if he had never existed. He wasn't a villain in a public drama. He was just a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered among a handful of lawyers and executives. He had lost everything, not with a bang, but with the quiet, efficient click of a delete key. There was a cold, procedural justice in that which I found deeply satisfying. 6 more months passed. My consulting business was now my full-time job. I hired a part-time assistant. I moved into a slightly larger apartment with a second bedroom that I converted into a proper home office. I was building a life, my life, on my own terms. One Saturday, I was at a farmer's market, buying vegetables for the week, when I saw her, my mother. She was standing at a stall selling artisanal jams, her back to me. She looked older, smaller than I remembered. There was a slump to her shoulders I had never seen before. For a moment, my heart ached with a primal, childish longing. I wanted to run to her, to have her turn around and smile, to have everything be okay again. I took a half step forward, my hand half raised, and then I stopped. What would I say? What would she say? The script of our relationship was broken, and I didn't know the new lines. Would she demand an apology? Would she offer one? I realized with a sudden, painful clarity that I was terrified of the answer. The fragile peace I had built was contingent on distance. I wasn't strong enough yet to see if it could withstand contact, so I did the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. I turned around, and I walked away. It wasn't an act of anger or spite. It was an act of self-preservation. It was an acknowledgement that some wounds are so deep that they can only be managed, not cured. I was choosing my own hard-won serenity over the chaotic, desperate hope of reconciliation. As I walked home, my canvas bag heavy with fresh produce, I thought about my garden app. I thought about the simple act of planting a seed. You put it in the ground, you give it water and sunlight, you protect it from weeds and pests, but you can't force it to grow. You can only create the conditions for growth to happen. You have to have patience, you have to have faith, and you have to accept that some seeds, no matter what you do, will never sprout. I was tending to my own garden now. It was a small plot, and some of it was still barren, but the things that were growing there were strong, and they were healthy, and they were mine. And for the first time, I knew, deep in my bones, that it was going to be enough. The relationship with Amelia continued its slow, tentative thaw. We started texting occasionally, then talking on the phone. The conversations were stilted at first, full of conversational landmines we both carefully avoided. We didn't talk about Marcus or our parents. We talked about books, about work, about the weather. We were learning to be sisters again, but a different kind of sisters. The old, easy intimacy was gone, replaced by a cautious, deliberate respect. We were two adults building a new relationship from the ground up, with a clear understanding of the foundations this time. One day, she asked me about my work, not in the old, dismissive way, but with genuine curiosity. I found myself explaining the principles of ethical hacking, of responsible disclosure. I told her about the Code Girls workshops. I could hear the surprise in her voice. She was seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time, not as her weird, difficult little sister, but as a competent professional with a life and a purpose that was entirely separate from her. "I'm proud of you, Alara," she said, her voice soft. It was the first time she had ever said those words to me. They landed with a gentle, healing warmth. My father never reached out. The silence from him was absolute. I came to understand that his pride was a fortress so thick that love couldn't penetrate it. He couldn't admit he was wrong, because that would mean admitting that his entire value system, the worship of money and status embodied by Marcus, was flawed. He would rather lose a daughter than lose the certainty of his worldview. It was a tragedy, but it was his tragedy, not mine. I couldn't fix it for him. I had to let him go. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place about 2 years after that fateful dinner. I was asked to give a keynote speech at a major cybersecurity conference. It was a huge honor. I was terrified, but Uncle Ben, who was now my go-to counsel for my consulting business, coached me through it. "Just tell them your story," he said. "Well, a legally approved, non-specific version of your story." I stood on that stage in front of 1,000 people, and I talked about the ethics of security. I talked about the pressure to cut corners, to meet deadlines, to prioritize profit over safety. I didn't mention Ethelcorp or Marcus by name. I didn't have to. I spoke about a hypothetical scenario, a case study in corporate negligence. I detailed the discovery of a critical flaw, the internal debate, the pressure from management, and the ultimate decision by a brave, anonymous internal source to force the company to do the right thing. I framed it as a story of a hero inside the company, to protect myself legally, and to make the lesson more palatable. But I was telling my story, the story of how a single person, armed with the truth, could stand up to power and win. I talked about the personal cost, the isolation, the difficult choice between professional ethics and personal loyalty. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment, and then it erupted in applause. Afterwards, a woman came up to me. She was older, with sharp eyes and a kind smile. "That was a powerful talk, miss," she said. "I'm Anya Sharma. I teach digital ethics at Stanford." The name was familiar. I had read her papers, cited her work. She was a giant in the field. "Dr. Sharma," I said, shaking her hand, feeling completely starstruck. "It's an honor to meet you." "The honor is mine," she said. "Your hypothetical case study?" I was on the independent audit team that verified the patch for Project Chimera. My blood ran cold for a second. She must have seen the panic in my eyes, because she smiled gently. "Don't worry. Your secret is safe with me. I just wanted to meet the person who did it. We saw your initial report to the Helios team. It was a brilliant piece of work. You saved that company from itself. You probably saved the jobs of hundreds of people who would have been wiped out in the collapse. And you protected millions of users from having their data sprayed all over the dark web. You never got the public credit for it, but the people who matter, we know what you did. It was one of the most courageous acts of ethical whistleblowing I've ever seen." Tears welled in my eyes. It was the validation I had stopped looking for. Not from my family, not from a paycheck, but from someone who truly understood the stakes, who saw the full picture. It was a quiet, professional acknowledgement of my competence and my integrity. We talked for an hour. She offered me a position as a guest lecturer at the university. She wanted me to teach a seminar on real-world ethical dilemmas in software development. Walking out of that conference center, I felt a sense of peace that was deep and profound. My journey had been born out of a moment of humiliation and anger at a family dinner. It had taken me through isolation, grief, legal battles, and profound self-doubt, but it had brought me here, to this place, a place where I was respected for my skills and valued for my principles, a place where my voice mattered. I had set out to get revenge on Marcus, to prove my family wrong, but somewhere along the way, the goal had changed. It had become about something bigger. It had become about finding my own worth, building my own community, and defining success on my own terms. The confrontation at the dinner table wasn't an end, it was a beginning. It was the fiery crucible that had burned away the person I thought I was supposed to be, leaving behind the person I truly was. And that person was strong. That person was resilient. That person was, finally, free.